Welcome to AI Decoded. I'm Marc Cieslak, the BBC's AI correspondent. There's a rising chorus of people in government and business claiming artificial intelligence will usher in a new era of prosperity. But this week, some of Silicon Valley's best paid workers are describing something very different: fear. A major Washington Post report reveals growing anxiety across the technology sector. White-collar workers who once felt untouchable are now asking whether AI could replace them. At the same time, protests against new data centres are spreading across the United States, with campaigners warning about AI's growing environmental and community impact. And then there's the biggest question of all. Could AI one day become conscious? Could it become what ethicists call a moral patient, something whose welfare matters in its own right? Joining me to discuss these issues are Cory Doctorow, author, digital rights activist, technology critic, and the person who coined the term enshittification. Just testing out the bleeper button there. And we also are joined by Dr. Ella Haffermout, Associate Professor of Knowledge, Information and Innovation at the School of Business and Economics at Vrije University, Amsterdam. And of course, AI Decoded co-host Priya Lakhani, CEO of Century Tech. Let's kick off when millions of people will feel AI most directly in the workplace. So I'm going to direct this to you, Ella. Are we witnessing a normal technological transition or something fundamentally different?
I think this is a step change. This is similar to when the internet came about. Work is dramatically changing. And one of the reasons that this is happening now is that it's so fast. So with the internet, there was a kind of gradual rollout of that. You probably had to go into the workplace to use the computer, or maybe you had one at home. With AI, this is different. Post-2022, everyone with a smartphone has AI in their pockets. It's very invisible, the way that it comes into the workplace. We can't detect it reliably, at least. You might have your suspicions, but it's hard to prove when it's being used. And this means that it's everywhere. It's also come for tasks that we weren't expecting, more your knowledge work tasks. And our institutions just have not had time to catch up. So schools, universities, workplaces, they have not yet been able to adapt to this new environment.
Cory, you've argued that technology isn't inherently good or bad. It's the institutions around it that matter. Is today's workplace anxiety really about AI, or is it more about corporate power?
Well, I think it's productive to distinguish between the fear that an AI salesman can convince your boss to fire you and replace you with a chatbot, as most sectors have become very monopolized and dwindled to cartels and duopolies and monopolies. I think that firms are quite comfortable with foisting lower quality products on the public. And so, I think a lot of people have this intuition that my boss will fire me, replace me with something that does my job badly, and then cram it down the public's throat.
Priya, you're at the sharp end, aren't you? Because you're in industry and you're working with AI every single day. The people that work with you
I am, and I'm actually really fascinated about Ella's view here, because your research is all about what happens after AI arrives, right? What are you actually seeing in organisations? Are you seeing, increases in efficiency and productivity equal capacity, or are you seeing organisations saying, okay, AI equals cuts?
Yeah, so this question a little bit assumes that organisations have a coherent AI strategy and that is what is actually happening on the ground. And sure, a lot of companies have their strategy, they have their policy, and then there's what's happening. And you have indeed consultants coming in, selling AI, companies saying, this is our approved AI system, we want to see everyone using it. And then you have workers who also, like I said, have this stuff in their pockets. And you might see some second laptops showing up at work for the unauthorized systems. People have their own AI agents, which are basically chatbots with a few added permissions so that they can carry out some tasks for you. So it's a bit of a wild west. And this kind of worker AI is meeting corporate strategy, and we're creating a whole kind of spaghetti in this.
There's lots of people who are worried about AI taking jobs, and you hear a lot about taking the junior roles, right? But in order to have expertise to frame the questions, you need that domain expertise to figure out the nuances, to take humanity forward, to figure out what innovations you want to develop, right? You need that expertise. So how does one get rid of all of the juniors, right? Take away the tasks and processes that introduce you to that experience and then still have expertise, Cory?
Yeah, I in my work have drawn on some of the automation theory and its analogies. So there is this idea in automation theory of a centaur, which is a person who's assisted by a machine. The analogy here is, you have the human head on the brute body of the horse. The horse can run longer than you and faster than you, and it's stronger than you, but it can't exercise the discernment that you have. So you're directing its actions. And the converse of this, obviously, is the reverse centaur. It's the horse's head on the human body. It's the person recruited to be the peripheral to the machine and to be directed by the machine. And what we see in that circumstance is that you are being told that your discernment has to be exercised at scale, at speed, over long time scales to mark the homework of the AI. That the AI is doing, 1,000 X-ray evaluations in a day, and you, the last radiologist left on staff, are expected to sign your name to the bottom of them and spot the anomalies at a pace that makes it absolutely inconceivable that you would really pay the attention to them, let alone the fact that if the AI is generally right, you're going to become a machine for clicking OK and not a machine for exercising discernment. And to that, I would add that when you have mass redundancies provoked by a management fad like, oh, well, we can replace all of our workers with AI, let's just get rid of them, you lose what's sometimes called process knowledge, which is the tacit knowledge held by all the workers in a firm across different divisions and then across different firms. It's all the stuff that's not written down, the stuff that you can't train an AI on because it's not written down. And that is the difference between, knowing that if you feed the feedstock into the machine too fast and it jams, this is the mobile number of the person who used to fix it. And if the person who normally fixes it is off on holidays, you can bring them in for 50 quid. They'll come in and fix the machine. And then your line doesn't shut down for a day, and not knowing that. So the scars of these management fads are very deep, and they take a very long time to heal.
Yeah.
Do you think, Cory, that we've learned any lessons from previous periods of industrial disruption?
Oh, I think we have learned no lessons at all in the last 25 years. We have so little object permanence as a society, we would lose a game of peekaboo. For example, we are living at the end of 2 decades of tech bubbles in which they promised that they could lose lots of money, but they would make it up when something that didn't exist came into existence and became so valuable that we would all be using the metaverse for 8 hours a day because there's nothing we all want more than to be legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon characters imprisoned in a virtual world stolen from a 25-year-old cyberpunk novel, right? And the fact that the same people who told us that story, these same people are telling us not only that AI is going to produce this unheralded profitability, but also that if we teach enough words to the word guessing machine, it'll become God. And we're just like, well, you guys have been wrong about everything for 25 years. You had one good idea 25 years ago, making a better search engine. You've had no good ideas since. All you've done is acquire your competitors and come up with dumb fads. But this time, I'm sure you're right. Let's bet $2 trillion in the global economy on it. I mean, oh my God, we have learned nothing.
Oh, wow. You barely came up for air there. You barely came up for breath.
So who or what should determine who benefits, right? And how do you see this actually happening? How do you see governments responding to this? Ella?
Yeah, Tolkien has a nice quote on this, that the labour-saving machine creates endless and worse labour. Hope I'm getting that right. But indeed, often these gains actually don't go back to the workers who are doing things faster. And we really do need to start thinking about if we're going to be saving 30% of time, because now these routine knowledge work tasks can be spat out by AI if it's just some text or something. We need to think about what to do with that. And this is a democratic process. We're seeing the public being enormously aware of these issues. And I think that this is quite new in some ways, just how onto it the general public are. So there's going to be a lot at stake in upcoming elections around this issue. I would really like to see the conversation also go beyond efficiency, beyond money. There are other things in our society which are worth spending time on other than work. Could be caring, raising kids, whatever that is. And it would be nice to see the conversation go a bit towards, okay, if we're going to save time using these tools, how do we spread that out?
What do you think about the OpenAI 5% goes to American citizens and this idea potentially of people being on a universal basic income?
That brings us into the universal basic income kind of.
Absolutely. What's the solution if we're going to care for our kids? So Ella's saying there are all these other things that are important, which I agree with. How do we fund that?
Well, I got to say, having the U.S. government take 5% ownership in the single money-losingest venture in the history of the human race does not sound like a good way for us to fund a new source of public services for everyone in the US or around the world, much less Bernie Sanders' idea of having America assume 50% of the liabilities of the money-losingest firm in the history of the world. I mean, a sector that is spending in the realm of $1.5 trillion a year and making $50 billion a year is not a thing you want to own 5% of. You want to run away from it as fast as you can. And I think particularly when 7 firms are 35% of the S&P 500 and 6 of them are losing money to the 7th. And when their investors run out of patience for subsidizing all the NVIDIA chips they're going to buy, NVIDIA goes under too. That what we should be worried about is making sure we don't bail them out, not that we own a piece of them. I think if we want to free up space in the economy, we can look to the role that monopolies play in just sitting on the throats of innovation, market entry, and new services, right? I mean, Facebook started off by saying, imagine if you got your social media not on MySpace and you could be free from, having everything you do surveilled by an evil billionaire. And now here we are, right? And the way Facebook did that is they made a tool and you gave it your login and your password for MySpace, and it would go to MySpace several times a day, pretend to be you, grab everything waiting for you there, and then go off to Facebook and put it in your Facebook feed. And then when you applied to it, it pushed back out to MySpace. But in 2001, we acceded to Article 6 of the Copyright Directive. It makes it a crime to reverse engineer and modify Facebook and do unto Mark Zuckerberg as he did unto Rupert Murdoch. And as a result, you have this service that is people just hate. The thing is they hate it. They hate the service less than they love their friends. And so they stay because they can't coordinate a departure. So we could just give them the same tool that Facebook had, and you could unlock the economic value that Facebook is currently crouching on. The fact that Facebook has enough money on its balance sheet that they spent $150 billion on AI this year, after spending $150 billion on AI over the previous 3 years, after spending $61 billion on metaverse, tells you that having that money on their balance sheet makes them a danger to themselves and others, right? They should be relieved of that money by someone who can put it to productive use as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that is to reverse engineer and make complementary products, which would open up a whole tech sector of innovation of things people want, not things people are willing to tolerate because their friends are trapped there.
But the thing about like UBI, Universal Basic Income. Is it a credible idea even in the first place? Because it seems to me like a kind of a techno-dystopian notion. The first time I came across this was in the early 80s in a comic strip in 2000 in a British comic called 2000 AD. Judge Dredd. In the 22nd century, unemployment was endemic and stood at 98%. And as a consequence of that, everybody in the city of Megacity 1 was on a form of welfare or universal basic income. It seems to me like it's a science fiction idea that is now being discussed almost credibly by people in government and by people in business. What do you think, Ella?
I think it is a credible option and it is being discussed. I think that before we go to that, there are some earlier steps that we could take. And what I'm seeing with large language models in particular is that they can spit out text that looks like what a knowledge worker can produce. And that is changing a little bit how the market is valuing these knowledge work outputs. Maybe some of that is showing up where we've been spending too much money. We know from the pandemic, right, there were workers who we couldn't do without. Nurses, carers, teachers, those were our essential workers. Are they the most highly paid and valued workers in our society and economy at the moment? They're not. So what I would prefer to see before we talk about universal basic income is how might we actually start to value the type of work that AI can't do, where we need people on these front lines, and actually redistribute some of our value towards those.
But are the economics of this current boom, if you like, are they sustainable, or do you think that we're in a bubble and that it's about to burst? What do you think, Cory?
Well, I don't think you can have these 7 firms passing around the same $100 billion IOU really quickly and pretending it's in all their bank accounts at once, where they're amortizing their core assets on a 5-year schedule, but really replacing them every 3 years, where they're making $50 billion a year and spending over $1 trillion a year, where they're giving away $100 bills at $1 a piece. And when they try to charge $5 a piece, all of their customers are like, your $100 bills are not worth $5. And then not think that there's some bubble stuff going on here. I don't think universal basic income in the sense of us replacing all of our labor makes any sense, because if for no other reason, we know that climate change is real. We know we have baked in a certain amount of sea level rise and other consequences because of the amount of heat we've sunk into the ocean, the amount of carbon we put in the air. We're going to have full employment for the next 300 years. We're going to have to move all of our coastal cities 10 kilometers inland. We're going to have to deal with hundreds of millions of traumatized climate refugees, some of whom might come from the Thames estuary. We're going to have to deal with zoonotic plague after zoonotic plague after zoonotic plague. We're going to have...
Is this about the distribution of where the wealth that comes, or where any of the profit from any effort
what
comes
profit?
from?
And I think it's really worth our listeners, though, hearing from Cory also the flip side, right? What are investors believing in here? The ones who have given them the money, the ones who are giving them the money to pay for the compute. We have to be able to say, well, OK, hang on, what is the belief? And then to Ella, that's to Cory. Straight after that, Ella, how many people are using ChatGPT? How many people are using all of these tools? Personal accounts, not the ones they're being forced on for employment. Why aren't they then voting with their feet? Firstly, what's the belief?
Yeah, I think you have to distinguish between the true believer investor and the cynical investor. And I think there's probably some of both in the mix here, right? So the true believer investor believes in something that I think is objectively very silly, which is that if you teach enough words to the word guessing program, it will wake up. This is like believing that if you breed horses to run faster and faster, eventually one of them will give birth to a locomotive, right? We're not word guessing programs that know more words. And the fact that guessing words can do things that looks like intelligence is very interesting.
It's a magic trick.
And it tells us some of the ways we can learn things. Someone told me the other day, well, a machine could probably guess what your spouse is going to say, and you can guess what your spouse is going to say. And I'm like, yes, but I can guess what my spouse is going to say because I understand her, and the machine can guess it because sometimes she repeats herself. And if you think those are the same thing, then you don't understand the difference between a system that fails well and a system that works well. Because when she says something that doesn't accord with the guess, I can make another guess about what that means, and all the machine can do is founder in its lack of any kind of understanding.
Not as advertised.
So why aren't people then voting with their feet, right? If they can see exactly what's going on, as you described, they can see that, the 5% is not going to be enough. There's a staggering statistic from one of the articles that Marc talks about at the outset, and it was 1/3 of total personal wealth in the United States is held by the top 1% of households, while the bottom half of Americans hold less than 3%. That's according to the Federal Reserve. So why are people then utilising these tools? Why aren't they just blocking them and saying, we're not having that?
There is, of course, a backlash. There are people who are not using it and are very vocal about that. There are also a lot of people who are using these tools, and it's ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all of these different ones, because they're very easy to use and they're there for you. At any time of day, they're there. They've got the answers. They're always, kind in the way that they've been programmed to interact with you, sycophantic. It's a seductive technology, and it's one that people become very reliant upon. In a lot of workplaces, there's a lot of pressure. You're being asked to produce, be more efficient. And under those conditions, if you have the option of grabbing a tool that will produce what looks like your work quickly, that's tempting. And when I ask my students, I have international business administration students who I talk to about AI, it's like a taboo. It's like we're talking about drugs. I say to them, so, who here uses AI? Get some tentative hands. But in the end, I kind of force them. I make them do a reflection under exam conditions. It's also for a grade, and they have to write by hand, which is a big shock. But in these reflections, we ask them to write about who am I in the age of AI? What am I using AI for? What does that say about me? And such moving, insightful reflections from these students, they're saying things like, oh, I reach for it automatically. I'm so hooked on this.
Yeah.
And even reflecting on it then, because we did a follow-up, would encourage them to step back, to be more mindful about this use. And we talk about, this is actually how it works. Let's watch some explainer videos. Is this thinking? No.
So there's this growing debate amongst philosophers, particularly in certain quarters of the AI industry as well, not just people on the philosophical side, regarding AI consciousness. Is this another sales tool? Is this a sales tactic? Or is there any chance that at some stage in the not too distant future, we'll see something which could be regarded as consciousness in these kind of technologies?
Well, look, I don't think that this kind of statistical extrapolation technique is related to consciousness. I think that it does teach us something about consciousness in the way that everything we've ever done to externalize some of our cognition has taught us something about what's happening in our own heads, and that it's a useful and interesting exercise in that regard. And I am a materialist, and I do think that consciousness is a material phenomenon that takes place in our bodies. And so I'm not going to rule out the possibility that someone will make a thing that is conscious. But I meet people, including so-called philosophers, who make claims about this. And the claims are so odd. Like I ran into someone who said, we've got a machine that's testing 51% of the way to consciousness. And I'm like, what is 51% of the way to consciousness?
That's like weigh this. Can you weigh someone's soul?
Well, more importantly, what's the difference between something that's 51% and 52% of the way to consciousness? You don't even know what consciousness is. You can't define it. And he said, well, you can't define it, so you don't know that it's not. I'm like, well, I don't know what the weather is in Poland, and I don't know what the weather is in France. That doesn't mean they're the same thing.
Yeah, you get a pretty good chance it's not going to be 400 degrees.
Right.
That's kind of crazy. That just feels like a person wants a headline. I mean, we don't know why there is this link between the biological brain and the mind, right? And
Sure.
and this link and how it appears. No one really understands. There's lots of theories. I think we're really in danger here of mistaking convincingly convincing behaviour.
Imagine effectively, an illusion.
Yeah, for mistaking that with subjective experience. I think that is a real danger here. And I'm really interested, Cory, why, when people understand that these are complex statistical models, do they then suddenly become so emotionally attached to these bots, that we're anthropomorphizing, I know, in terms of some of the technologies, we're making it seem like a he or a she.
It's not just consumers, because you've got the guys who are basically selling these models as well, who are making these kind of illusions and are leaning into the idea that there could be some form of consciousness appearing or emergent.
I think it's part of the pitch, for sure. I also think that it's a very low bar to clear that people feel empathy with an inanimate thing.
Yeah, people are attached to teddy bears.
I was going to say, we love our teddy bears. We feel sad when we take an old piece of clothing that we've worn for many years and it finally goes in the rag bag. I mean, having empathy for the physical world is actually a thing. And, there is some value to it.
Yeah, because you're painting it as... forgive me, but everyone listening to this is going to say there are 5 or 6 evil people who are just dominating.
I don't know about it's evil people, but I would say there are 5 or 6 companies that it's in their interest to do certain things.
Yeah, we're going to be the infrastructure behind everything. We're going to be inside of everything, and then everything's going to turn to poop, which is the word that you used earlier. So I mean, is that what we're saying, Cory? Is that your argument?
Well, historically, as I said, when labor drives automation, we get things that are good for all of us because it's used to improve quality. And when capital drives automation, it's used to improve throughput. And there are 2 ways that labor can have the power to drive automation. One is if they're scarce. And so we've just lived through a period in which tech workers were very scarce. And I know we have this cliche of the tech bro, but I think if you look in the souls of a lot of tech workers, you find people who are I call them Tron-pilled, because they want to fight for the user, right? They've expanded their horizons and changed their life's destiny because they got involved with network computers and found words and communities that they never suspected existed, ideas that just absolutely revolutionized their lives. And they want everyone else to have that benefit. If you have a friend who uses Linux, ask them about their computer and try and make them stop, right? We know what that person is like. And they were scarce. The average Silicon Valley engineer added $1 million to the bottom line of their firm's annual turnover, right? That's why they got the free kombucha and the massages and so on. We know how tech bosses treat workers they don't like. Those are the people assembling iPhones in a factory with suicide nets. Yep. Those are the Amazon drivers weeing in bottles, right? There's nothing about working at Amazon's head office writing software that says you can't be made to pee in a bottle because you're on a quota. It's just that you were scarce, and there was $1 million that would walk out the door if you quit your job, and there were 10 bosses at the door who'd give you a job. So then we have eventually supply catching up with demand, 500,000 redundancies in the sector over the last 4 years. There's 10 workers at the factory gates who will take your job. AI bosses will not shut up about how many of you they plan to fire and replace with chatbots. And so everyone's feeling quite precarious and no one's fighting for the user. So that's one way that we can have worker power, but it's very brittle because it's entirely related to scarcity. The other way is unions, it's solidarity. And of course, the best time to consolidate the power of scarcity is when you're scarce. And if you wait until it's too late, well, there's a joke from Eastern Canada whose punchline is, if you wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here. But here we are.
Final thought to you on that, just on that issue about workers empowering themselves in the age of AI.
We go into organisations and look at what people are doing, and here we are seeing some people really having a great time with AI. For example, with Jana Rutkowski and Marlene Hausmann, we just published a paper looking at the creative sector, and we looked at people working in advertising. There you've got senior creatives sitting down with Midjourney, text-to-image technology, and they're having a great time. You know, they're iterating, they're checking. And I liked, you used the word discernment earlier, Cory, and the original meaning of the word skill is discernment, judgment. Can you tell if what is coming at you is good? And these guys are very good at that. They've been delegating to graphic designers for a long time. Now they're delegating to AI, and it's able to really kind of go with them in this journey. That's not without trade-offs, though, of course. We also saw that, therefore, the graphic designers are not getting the opportunity to jump into that work. Photographers are ending up having to recreate an AI concept image rather than interpreting a sketch.
We have to end it, I'm afraid. That's all we've got time for. Thank you to our incredible guests. If you have any thoughts, questions or feedback on today's programme, do email us. The QR code is on screen as well right now. There you go. You can email us at aidecoded@bbc.co.uk, and the QR code will take you to the AI Decoded YouTube playlist. And every episode, of course, is on the BBC iPlayer. We'll see you next time.